McAllister. Senator Urquhart.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to speak in support of the Mitochondrial Donation Law Reform Maeve's Bill 2021. A lot of what I will say I think has probably been said, but I did feel the need to put my voice to this because I do support the bill and I do support the outcomes of what this bill will achieve for parents, for children and people in our community with mitochondrial disease. So today I don't speak on behalf of my whole party. I speak as an individual senator because this will be a matter debated and voted on as a conscience vote or a free vote, and we know that. We know our members of the members of my party will have a conscience vote on this matter. But again, as I said, I felt the need to put my voice on the record for this. It's a consistent way in which the Labor Party has treated issues around embryo research since 2002. So there are matters of conscience to do around embryo research, around matters that deal with abortion, which are free votes. That decision's not made lightly, and I trust that I speak for my fellow Labor senators when I say I really appreciate the opportunity with which we are provided and the consistency of our party's approach on these matters. The bill is appropriately named Maeve's Law, after Maeve Hood, a young girl from Victoria with mitochondrial disease. Mitochondrial disease is a debilitating genetic disorder that strips the body's cells of energy, causing multiple organ dysfunction or failure, and sometimes, quite often, death. It has no cure, with treatments currently available aiming to decrease the effects of the symptoms. At present, these treatments do not significantly change the course of the disease. And I think that's the reason why I support the passing of this bill, and I hope it does pass this parliament. Around 1 in 5,000 babies we know are born in Australia. That's more than one baby a week, will develop a severely disabling and likely terminal form of this disease. Most of these children will die within the first 5 years of their life. It's hard when you grapple with that. If you're a parent and you know that there may be an opportunity to save your baby, would you not put that forward? And I think that's the opportunity that we should make as legislators in giving that choice to those parents through the support of this bill going through the House here today. Mitochondrial disease is caused by a defect in the mitochondrial DNA of the baby, which is a type of DNA that is passed only through the mother. That is passed on through the egg cells rather than the sperm cells. Our mitochondria helps to translate the energy we consume to enable our bodies to operate effectively. Mitochondrial donation involves replacing the mother's mitochondria with mitochondria from a donor egg. Mitochondrial DNA does not influence a person's characteristics such as height, eye colour or their intelligence. All these characteristics are determined by the nuclear DNA, which is not impacted at all by the donation process. We've heard today, and through the many inquiries and reports that have brought us to this place, much about all of the technical and ethical issues that the bill raises. These issues are of concern for some members, and I appreciate those concerns, and I have considered them deeply. But I hope that today, in the vote that we will have in this place, that we will reach a point where we decide that this bill is about people. It is about people out there and attempting to save their children from a terrible disease. It is about babies. It's about very young children and their parents, grandparents, and of course their wider families. It is about relieving suffering and giving children the opportunity to live a normal, healthy life and realise their full potential. My view is very much informed by the knowledge that mitochondrial DNA is distinct from nuclear DNA, which makes up the overwhelming bulk, as much as 99.9% of a person's DNA. It is this nuclear DNA which determines what we would understand to be a person's unique characteristics, their look, their personality. Mitochondrial DNA constitutes 1/1000th of a person's DNA, and its basic function is to convert food and oxygen into energy. Sometimes some describe it as our battery pack, whereas nuclear DNA goes to make up what we understand to be the unique characteristics of a human. I note that we as senators must grapple with the fact that this bill raises issues that must always be considered in relation to science and healthcare. These issues are as old as medical science itself, and we continually hear about looking at the science and the medical advice. How much should we intervene is a question. How far should we go? Is this a move towards designer babies? And I do understand that some members of my community hold ethical and faith-based beliefs which make consideration of this issue very difficult for them personally. Personally, I find comfort in the fact that this bill is consistent with the definition of embryo under the law in Australia. Both of the two main approaches to mitochondrial donation, pro-nuclear transfer and maternal spindle transfer, probably do not involve activity undertaken at the point of an embryo. I think everyone in this chamber recognises that this raises very sensitive issues. We are dealing with a disease that too often is fatal for very young members of our community, causing enormous grief and real suffering to their families, their friends and their extended families. And we are dealing with some deeply held, serious ethical and faith-based beliefs. Mitochondrial disease is an incredibly serious genetic disorder which, as I've stated, is often fatal for very, very young children. Energy-demanding tissues such as brain and muscle are most commonly but not exclusively affected. In Australia, the incidence of mitochondrial DNA mutations is predicted to be at least 1 in 250, with several hundred families already diagnosed, although many carriers remain unidentified. Some families have multiple generations of affected individuals, often with devastating consequences. Their healthcare needs present enormous emotional, physical, social and financial burdens on families, leading many couples to seek options to prevent disease transmission to their offspring. Currently, their choices include voluntary childlessness, adoption, using eggs donated by unaffected women, or prenatal and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. I believe that this legislation, Maeve's bill, is well designed and well considered, balancing the extraordinary potential emerging technologies, and we have a lot of them in this country and across the world, that we have to improve our medical practice and the quality of life for a number of Australian families, while recognising the ethical issues that are posed for many Australians and the need to tread carefully through this in a slow and staged process. It is clear that mitochondrial donation can significantly reduce the risk of maternally inherited mitochondrial disease transmission to children. For some families, it proves their only option is to have unaffected, genetically related children. Here in Australia, we certainly have the clinical and the scientific expertise to introduce mitochondrial donation in a highly regulated environment. That is, if Maeve's Law passes both houses of this parliament. And I know that there have been many contributions here over the last couple of days in this place that tell stories of some of our senators who have met with families, who have talked to families about what this means to them. I don't have any knowledge of those families, and I don't know the families. But what I know in my heart is that if my child was affected, or a child that I know, or in fact any child, I think that they have the right to make the decision, and therefore we should make the law that allows them to have that right to make the decision whether they go ahead with it or not. I believe that the cautious and staged approach overseen by a licensing committee is appropriate. It flows from deep consideration over several years. And I want to acknowledge here the work done by my fellow senators on the Community Affairs Legislation Committee for the inquiry and the report that they produced into the matter in August 2021. There is a long way to go in developing the protocols, the techniques and the understanding of this research, but it does provide real hope to many families across Australia, those families that we know have these children with this disease. I've already indicated at the start that I will be voting in favour of this bill, recognising that these issues are not easy for many members of our community. I am convinced this legislation is worthy of our support and that ultimately it will lead, through a careful and staged approach, to a reduction in suffering and disease to children and families who have the freedom to realise their potential and make the fullest contribution to our society and the world. And that's something that I think we all want for not only our own children, but to children in general. We want them to have the fullest potential that they can have. In my work as a senator and in my personal life, I've known and provided what support I could to many families dealing with the agony of witnessing the suffering and death of a child through various chronic or genetic illnesses. As I said, I don't know a family with mitochondrial, but I do know of other families that have children who have either died or are suffering through chronic and genetic illnesses. And I think the opportunity for us to be able to provide the mechanism for those families to make a choice about making that better for their children is something that we should not hold back on, and we should allow this bill to pass. Witnessing that same suffering, the deep grief, the same gaping hole in the life of a family and the community when a life is lost, I firmly believe that it is our job as leaders in our community to do whatever that we can ethically do to reduce that pain and suffering and to limit that terrible loss that parents and families have at the loss of a child. And I will definitely be supporting this bill. Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President.